Thank you for the introduction, Rolly. That was awesome. He's right. We've known each other since the very beginning. I was actually, as I was running through this presentation, I was thinking back to how it all started, like where Catalyst came from. And actually, now that Raleigh reminds me, he was at that very first workshop. We just come back. We were living in Ecuador, and we realized we needed to, like, the online courses from the Soil Food Web School weren't doing it for us. And we really wanted to learn from Elaine in person. And we came back, learned from her. And then that very first time we got invited to actually help her was the class where we met Raleigh. And it was crazy that you used the word passion, because I think that's all we really had going for us at the time. We knew how to make hand-turned piles, like, no question. We'd microscoped, 6, 7, 8, not that many actually, of our own piles that we built at our house. But these are tiny 1-yard piles. We're not talking about a entire lot full of windrows. And it was at that workshop that, like, we started talking to other students, and we're like, we're all armed with microscopes. We have way too much time on our hands. We're just listening to Elaine constantly and believing that there should be microbes everywhere we look, all over the world. We should be seeing protozoa, nematodes, fungi everywhere. And as we looked at, the natural native soils, as we looked at other compost piles, we realized, like, there's a severe lack of microorganisms in the places that they should have been. And you get around enough people that are like us, that are microbe minded, and things get passionate, things get exciting, things get crazy. And out of nowhere, we just decided, oh, well, we need to start a large scale compost facility. That's our destiny, or whatever. And it really was like a flash of lightning. It was just like, bam, we're doing this. And it's funny because I think, it was passion mixed with luck in the beginning, because, like, really, we had no idea what was going to go into building a large scale facility. What we were afraid of first was, like, oh my gosh, will we do a good job at building compost? Will other consultants like Brian Vagg be mad at us? So we, before we started our business, we wrote Brian and Shelby, his wife, and told him our plan. And, like, I hope you guys are okay with this. And Brian's like, man, I can't find good compost anywhere. This is amazing that you're going to do this, right? So we had Raleigh, we had Brian, we had Elaine, we had all these people cheering for us, like, go, go, go. And then we had luck on our side, like I said. So, in the beginning, we worked our booties off. It was, we'd come to work at 8 a.m. in the morning. We'd work 14, 15-hour days. We were working 7 days a week. We were throwing ourselves against the reality of large scale compost, figuring out how to back up trailers, how to drive compost turners, how to keep from getting hit in the head with rocks when those compost turners throw them. Figuring out flooding and how to build compost pads, and how to change hydraulic fluid, all this stuff. There was more to worry about than we ever considered. Not to mention California and its absolutely crazy state of regulations, right? So slowly over the years, we climbed through the process. We, one thing at a time we accomplished. And, I think after about 3 years or so, we started to, like, develop this mantra: what's going to make life easier for us? And we started to really streamline our processes. We started to look at, where are our input materials coming from? One of the big differences between us and other compost companies is we don't actually collect any waste from anywhere. We grow our own material. We buy all of our input materials. We're very, very careful with what we source, right? So there was a huge learning curve there, because there's nobody out there to really show us the way. Large scale compost typically is run on a way where they're getting paid to receive waste, they're reducing that waste, and they're getting it out the door as quickly as possible. I attribute a lot of our success to the fact that we just didn't know the proper way. Well, we never really looked into it. We just decided to reinvent the wheel, which is kind of crazy. But we came out the other side with a good product that was really, really reliable. So then we came up to a point where it was obvious that we needed to get a product on shelves. It was also obvious to us that not everybody needs a yard of compost. We started to learn from our clients over time that our compost, like, a little bit goes, like, a really, really long way. And so we started to think about, making our bags a little bit smaller.
But yeah, and so after we've streamlined our processes, we've got the compost, we can actually make good compost. Our next big hurdle was, yeah, like Keisha said, is how do we put it into a small package? How do we put that small package on a shelf? And how do we make sure that those microbes that are in that compost are actually going to stay alive while they're waiting for somebody to purchase them, take them home? And so, yeah, that was our next big step, is figuring out shelf stability. So we did all kinds of crazy things to compost. We basically tortured compost to see what it could go through so that we could, you know, just see how long it was going to keep. You know, we put 1 yard totes in a barn in 100-degree weather and just let it sit there for 6 months, and then just kind of started digging into it and seeing how much of that would actually still be usable. And then with our bags processes, we actually would take bags, package them, put them in a box, throw them in the back of the car, and just leave it in the back of the car for 6 weeks, and then crack that box open and see like, oh yeah, actually look, the compost is still doing well. It was packaged in a box. It had insulation around it, so it would actually keep it from going bad. And then we developed our own bag. We actually, the bag that we sell our compost in is made nowhere else. It's our bag. We basically invented it. We had to think about things as normal compost bags have teeny tiny little micro pinholes in them that lets the air in, which it doesn't really. So we developed a bag that basically has like a pencil sized holes all throughout the whole thing. So some does fall out, which is, you know, it happens, but what it does is actually allows a lot of airflow in there. We also created a bag that was gusseted, so it actually has to sit up vertically so people can't stack, you know, a huge pallet of it. You can see the pallet there. You can see all the air holes on the sides that are actually exposed to air. And then when it goes in on a shelf, it actually has to sit upright. And so it avoids all that stacking and like trapping out of all the oxygen in there. Um, well, we also too on our pallets, you can see at the very bottom of it, we put a little bit of cardboard down there at the bottom to kind of, it catches the moisture because we ship our compost so wet. Comparative to other compost companies, you know, we ship it at 50% moisture. Other people ship it at 30%. So it's basically like dry dust and not a lot lives in there. So we actually had to put a little bit of a kind of an absorbent pad at the bottom because it does, when you stack it up, a little bit of moisture does come out the bottom.
So with the bags too, so at first we were bagging everything by hand. Honestly, I'm so analog from the beginning. I think I was influencing too much work by hand, but it's beside the point. We were hand bagging everything, and it took a lot of time to figure out the ergonomics of it and like how to fill the bags and, you know, just how to go through that whole process. And it was taking a ton of our time. Again, we've been trying to find space for consulting, trying to find space for teaching, because that was our ultimate goal, right? We didn't want to be a compost producer. We wanted to be consultants. So we found Vital Garden Supply. And, you know, these guys, when you listen to Brian, who's the owner, talk about how long we've known each other, it starts at the day that I got my microscope and my bag, my sample bag, and came into his store like, I want to check every single product you have for microbial content. That's what he remembers. And the truth, we've been buying products from Vital Garden Supply for like, I mean, basically since my early 20s, like my whole life in California, because they have whole foods like fish hydrolysate, kelp, nice organic products that you can actually feed the microbes in the soil. So, you know, they were kind of stars to us. We always thought that if somebody was going to take our product, it would be them. And lucky for us, they took it on. We've been working with them for years now. They actually helped us develop our bag. They helped us understand, we had so many bad ideas in the beginning that we tried. And they just kept saying, you know, you're going to have to make your own bag. The bag can't be see-through, you know, all these different tips and tricks that we wouldn't have got on our own. And they also were patient with us because like I can be kind of crazy on the quality control side of things. If I feel like anything's wrong, I just pull all the bags off the shelf, bring them back to the warehouse, and we just kind of start over with the microscope, checking and making sure there's no problems. I think both the times I did that, there wasn't actually a problem, but they were so patient with me and just, I don't know, they've always allowed space for the fact that we need that quality there. So they were the first person to put us on the store, on like a store shelf. But then just recently in the past year and a half, they're actually working with us to distribute to other stores. So just recently this year, we got into a few different places in LA, which is huge. And they're just kind of, I don't know, partners in crime, helping us understand as we grow how to actually scale what we do in a way that, you know, works for everyone. You know, like Casey was talking about, it's pretty typical for compost to go on a pallet and sit out in the sun outside of the building until they're ready to stock the shelves. Vital's got to go out there and find stores that are crazy enough to only stock, you know, a quarter yard of products in a bag at a time, which isn't normal. You know, we're not, the shelf life on our product is longer than we'll let it stay, but we really don't like to push it. So, you know, every single place that they get us into, like they're just as crazy as we are. So like, we're really enjoying this expansion and having a team, somebody who's smarter than us in that way to help us play it out.
And so, yeah, after we figured out those processes, it's given us a lot more time to actually go out and do the consulting work that we wanted to do in the first place. And so what we've been seeing, with a lot of the farmers that, one of our very first like large customers, what came to us, he came out to the facility and he says, look, I'm working with Brian Vagg. He says, I need your compost. I'm going to buy a yard. This is ridiculous. I don't think I'm ever coming back here again. And now he is our number one customer. He purchases at least 1 yard every week throughout the entire summer. And he only wants one at a time because he doesn't want to have to take care of it. So he buys it, uses it, moves it out. He's built the largest extractor machine I've ever seen. That's what's actually photoed right here. Brian's going to talk more about this particular farmer more in his presentation, but yeah, what we saw, what was cool is once we actually, got to get out there and start working with farmers, we saw that most of them they were doubling down or tripling orders just to start using this into their farms, and because they were seeing such results come from small and consistent applications of compost extract, compost tea. They're reducing their input costs on fertilizers and nitrogen units by up to 70% in some places. It was cool too. This farm, and there's actually another farm that we've seen actually spraying our compost extract out of helicopters, landing on giant trucks, coming down, sucking up microbes into the helicopter, flying off and spraying them over fields. There was a huge project actually out in Nevada where the Washoe tribe is actually using it from a hydro seeder from a helicopter as well to get to like hard to reach cliff places and things like that. It's just super neat to see people putting it into use and actually seeing those results and actually coming back and like working with us, we working with them to try to just dial in the processes and actually see huge improvements on different farms.
All right, so I have to admit, big party foul, webinar party foul. I have all these updates for you guys on these excellent updates, good video, and I actually passed the entire hard drive off to Raleigh about 2 weeks ago when we were hanging out, thinking, oh well, you could use this video more than me. You're gonna edit it and promote, and I just like dropped all my new content. So this is
It's mine now.
this is I could have asked Raleigh for certain videos, but I had not that plan in my mind. So you guys, there's gonna have to be webinars in the future. And actually, as I was going through this, trying to time it, each one of these people could be their own entire webinar. And honestly, these are all landscapes that we're working with in Southern California. And they're hard to film to get, just one photo or two photos, as they're, multi-acre properties. We've done a bunch of different projects on each property. And I would just love to bring them on someday just to talk about, what this process has been. But I've just picked two, and there's not a lot of photos with it. But I want to say before I get started, this is not just our work. We cannot take credit for the transformation on these properties, because these are actually students of ours. Our relationship started about 3 years ago at a workshop at one of the properties, and they learned how to make compost. They learned how to make compost extract. They bought their own small machines that they could spray at their house. And they teach composting now. They are constantly working with compost, but they do invest in us to bring in our big machines. So the thing is when you're talking about spraying at scale, these giant these giant spray machines are super expensive. They take big trucks to pull. They're just not something that you typically keep around, for an at-home project. So this property here, Little Doom, it's in Malibu. What you're looking at here, this property is gorgeous. I'm not going to show you any other pictures of it. I'm just going to show you this one. This is where their house was when the Woolsey fire came through. The house burned down. If you know anything about when houses burn down, FEMA comes in afterwards. They scrape the ground all the way to bedrock, or they take out a good chunk of soil. There's nothing left. It was already a foundation of a house, so there wasn't any soil there. What they wanted us to do was come in and make a temporary landscape that was soil focused. They didn't want anything in the landscape that was going to hurt or damage microbes or soil. I mean, to the point that we didn't even use concrete, right? So this is what it looks like actually a year ago. It's, oh no, this is it today. This is it today. But what was interesting about this project was it was completely flat ground. There was no soil. You could not get an injector into the ground. And our goal here was to have a photo-worthy garden space in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, that like there was a whole photo crew that was coming in to film the whole thing, and I was just like, I don't even know if this is possible. Like, I don't know if you can go from bedrock to something beautiful in a matter of weeks. And you know what? We did it. We used all the best compost. All of the stones are laid into sand. It was absolutely soil focused, soil forward. Every single thought we had. Most of the plants are native. And you know what I assumed would happen is we're going to put them in the ground. They're going to take pictures, and then everything is going to go through shock. It literally never did. The garden started out beautiful. It grew gorgeous the whole entire time. And today it's amazing. This garden is temporary though, because they're going to build another house here. So you can see everything is in boxes. Everything is able to be picked up and moved to a new location. Now, I'm just going to tell a couple little side stories about this property because I've got so many of them. When we first came here right after the Woolsey fire, we were having a workshop, like I said before. They had some trees that they were big 24-inch boxes they'd put in the ground about a year before, and they just wouldn't take. The ground was so solid that the roots wouldn't go through the sides. So we came in to show our students how we can inject. It was the very first injection that happened. I couldn't get the injector into the ground at all, not even a half an inch. So one of the biggest guys in the group came over and he was like, I'm going to do this. And he really powered that injector into the ground about 3 inches, and then it was shooting water back up into our face. If you don't know what a compost deep root zone injector is, it's a probe that you can push about 3.5 feet in the ground, and you can get microbes to the root zone of a plant. They're super effective for trees. So, we had that experience. We treated that space another 3 or 4 times in a year. We came back, we had Elaine in to co-teach with us in a workshop. All those same students came back because Elaine was there. Of course, they wanted to see her. She's incredible. And we came to the trees to do the injection portion of the class. And that same student stepped up and he was like, I'm gonna do it. And he went and he put all of his pressure onto that injector, and he almost fell on his face because the injector just went right through the ground. And everybody that was there, including myself, our jaws dropped because it was like, holy cow, like this really works. I don't know how many years I have to do this and like to stop being amazed when it really works, but it was incredible, and we stepped back and we looked at the photos from before because I had them on my phone right there. And that tree was like, it was huge. It had grown 3 inches. It was, the top was completely, the foliage was beautiful. It was casting shade on the ground. It was like, obviously, we created soil from what was concrete. And it was just incredible to watch this soil grow at this location over time. Another little quick one was just spraying. When we used to come with our 550 gallons, we could spray the whole property with one tank. Now we can spray half of the property with one tank. And we're starting to just spot spray on the places that don't look perfect. And this is just how it is through the years, watching things get better and better with time. This property does not put any chemicals on. They do not add nutrient. They are compost creators, like I said. They use a lot of tree paste and permaculture and water saving techniques, but this is a totally microbe-focused landscape. Now this picture does not do this place justice at all. We were working on what she had on her phone last night because like I said, I didn't have any, but this is Lily's property and it was the steepest. You can see from the photo how steep it is. Steep, no plants growing. Her and her husband don't like using irrigation. They don't want to use any extra water. So the landscape that they bought this house in, it was a thirsty, water-dependent landscape. It needed a lot of irrigation. So when they cut it, what you saw was dead trees, lots of issues all over the property, and then just bare ground. So you can imagine when the rain hits that, the erosion that comes into play. And over time, putting in a lot of swales and waterworks, but really making sure that we're getting extract on the ground 4 or 5 times a year and getting compost and mulch everywhere. This property has completely transformed over the years. So I hope to bring her on sometime and just show you guys a lot of aerial views of how it's transformed. Like that's really the ticket when you're talking about landscape.
So also like we were mentioning, we streamline our process. We're able to do a lot more at Catalyst. So, when we are building compost at our compost lot, we really only use our compost equipment about 2 to 3 months out of the year, which really freed us up for this idea that, we were like, well, we have this compost turner, it's sitting, it needs to be used. That's what it's meant for. It's meant for creating compost. So we kind of came up with this idea of like, well, let's just put it out there and see if anybody's interested. And so we kind of made this traveling turner idea. We just sent it out there like, hey, does anybody want us to build compost at their location since we have time? And so, yeah, it's pretty cool. We've done, I think, 3 different compost lots now, all the way from Florida to just different locations in California. Our first one was this farm here. It's in Gwenda, California. It's about a 1.5 acre lot. It's this spot is super cool because all the compost that these guys create, they just use it on site. It's like not for selling. They just wanted a massive amount of compost because it's an 80-acre farm, I believe. It's ranging anywhere from fruit trees to vegetables to leafy greens. They even have some like a greenhouse or two with some tropicals as well. But it's super neat. They produce, I think, 150 to 500 yards a year, and they use it all just on site in their farm. Very cool. And then this is the second location that we were able to put together in Florida. This woman called us out. She wanted us to she's basically wanted to get into the compost game, but didn't want to have to invest in all of the equipment that she needed. So we drove out to Florida, towed that compost turner out there with us. We were able to get out there, set this compost lot up, build all the windrows, have them turned and ready, and actually cooled down within 30 days. It was pretty cool. It was like, we were like, well done, us. We actually pulled that off. But yeah, the goal on this farm, I think it's 40 acres. They do hay, and they're going to start running cattle. But again, half of it's going into their own fields. They're actually using it on site. And then the other half, what they're wanting to do with it is set up small package distribution. And they also sell some of it to local farmers.
The bus tour. So I guess like it's fun to think about all the different things that you can do working with microbes. Like in the beginning, I keep talking about this, but it was like we thought we were going to be consultants, which we are consultants. Love it, consulting all the time. But the things that like pop out of nowhere, the fun that's to be had with composting is insane. I never, ever, ever imagined that it would be what it is. The micro bus tour was just one of those things, one of my crazy ideas that came out of nowhere. Danny Compost Malone, you guys might follow him on Instagram. He works with us, and his dream was to buy a bus, and he scrapped and he saved and he got the bus, and he got it to the compost lot, and then he was like, "Oh, I don't want this bus anymore. I'm already over it." We had a good friend, Chad. He's pictured here. He came to visit us. Unrelated to composting, and he saw the bus and was like, "Oh, this is my bus. I've been looking for a bus like this forever. Lucky for you, Chad, it's for sale." So he bought the bus, and right away I was like, "I got to go on this adventure with you. You're driving it to Nova Scotia. This is going to be awesome." And Casey, the voice of reason, was like, "That's going to be a 6-week drive." It's like not 6 weeks, but it's going to be a long trip. It would take us, I don't know, multiple days to get there on even if we were just passing through as fast as possible. So I thought, hey, what if we make it a compost tour? I created a map. I put it up on Instagram of where we were going to drive from California all the way to Nova Scotia. It's the furthest east point we could get from our house. And people were just game. They were super excited to be a part of it. Right away, we just booked out. I think it took a while to get 9 workshops, but at a point we had to stop, saying we can't take any more workshops. We don't have enough time. And what we learned, this was one of the best teachers I've had since Elaine. It was crazy. I never imagined what it would do to my brain to sit in a bus that was driving like 25 miles an hour. We thought the bus would go like 65 or 70. No, it was a slow bus. So it really was a 6-week trip. Really sat in the back and very slowly, very quietly looked out the window and watched all these countries as we went by. And I watched the flow of water over the land, and I watched the landscape, and we met the people. Every single workshop was different. Every single group we had was different. From working in a mining town in the middle of Nevada, where it was like literally the group of people that came, like microbe farmers get along, people that like soil get along. And this is like, there was the people that put the X that marks the spot to dig the gold. The actual miners were there. The people that work for the mining company in the ecological department that make sure that all of the ground is restored when it's over, they were there. The ecologists in town that don't like the mine, that spend their whole life going against it, they were there. And then there was a bunch of our elders there who wanted to spend their time actually changing that town so it's not all about mining and that it's about microbes, right? So all these people you would think would not get along, but we sat in a room together and had the best time. And, we got to learn at every single place we stopped, there was another issue that they were dealing with. And it was all across the board. It wasn't like, oh, my yields aren't enough, or I'm worried about pests. Like, there was all kinds of problems. And that was just the greatest teacher, to go from place to place to place and just kind of discover the problems and work on solutions as a group. Also, many of these people are best friends now. Honestly, we keep in touch with a lot of people that we met. And there was multiple compost companies. Chad has a permitted legal compost facility. He's selling small bags. He's selling yards all over Canada. Colleen as well started a large scale facility. She teamed up with someone to make it happen. And I mean, I could go on and on with examples of people that are just taking microbes and making it fun, or making it a career. I should have pictured Chad. Chad actually just did a presentation. He was teaching about compost at this crazy rave music festival, and he had Skippy the monkey actually doing his compost extract like demonstration, right? So they're taking it and just doing things that are far beyond us, and I don't know, it's just incredible. The other thing was Camp Catalyst. So Camp Catalyst was an event that we recently put on. This is the first time that we've brought in a lot of teachers from outside of our zone. We had Brian Vagg there, who was incredible. He put on a few different good talks. Actually, I won't go through everyone, but we brought in, like, I think 12 different speakers from all over the country. A lot of people talking about soil, a lot of people talking about things that were a little out of the realm, like astrology or planting with the moon. But we had, it was a fun gathering where everyone kind of met together. And again, like, the diversity of the crowd was crazy. We had, PhD scientists down to, like, people that were working at sandwich shops that had no idea about soil. And Brian brought it up afterwards. He was like, man, could we have gotten along better? Like, it was 50 people just having the best time. It was a camp out. And it was also like, you can see from the compost pile there, it was also a memorial. I don't have enough time to talk about it in depth, but we lost a business partner a year ago, Zach Ellis, and his heart was compost. And so he really inspired this idea of taking beauty, taking time, taking intention, and putting it into the composting process. So I think we're going to do this at Camp Catalyst every year if we get to keep having it, where we literally build the most beautiful compost pile we can. You can see all those flowers. Those 50 people slowly and intentionally decorated that compost pile. And then when it got turned, I don't know, there's something that just feels really complete and good about that. But we're taking this work and we're making it our own. And I think that's what's really, really exciting about the job. If I go back to the very beginning and look at it, I assumed, like, I would just be filling out spreadsheets and, like, giving advice all the time. And actually, it turned out to be a much more exciting ride than that. I do believe that is all that we have for this presentation. Thank you so much. And Brian, you're up.
Okay.
Thanks, Keisha. Thanks, Casey.
Thank you,
Real quick,
guys.
we should also matter. So we'll put the link in there, but Keisha and Casey operate Catalyst Bioamendments, and you can buy their soil directly in bulk. And I'll drop the link. But yeah, if you guys want to, like, I want soil, I want it now, you can order direct, and I'll give you the link. And Keisha and Casey and Brian, they have a consultant company they operate together called Soil Matters. So I'll put both those links in the chat box.
Great, thanks. And yeah, hi, I'm Brian Vagg. And Keisha and Casey, I love their story about how we met, and actually my reliance upon you guys early on, because I could tell you what, when I was first starting off as a consultant, one of the hardest things for me was to be able to find good quality compost inoculum that I could use for my clients. And I was so excited when Keisha and Casey decided they were going to create their compost lot. And then the quality of the product that was coming off of there, it was amazing. And to this day, I still, for my clients that are pretty much on the West Coast, we use a lot of Catalyst compost. So yes, thank you guys so much. and with that, we're really good friends, and we each had our own consulting businesses, and we decided, what, let's actually combine forces so we can tackle some more of these large scale projects. And we also bring a little different sets of skill sets into the equation, and it works out fantastic. So we created a company called Soil Matters. All right. So for me today, I'm going to just talk a little bit about how I approach working with clients, and kind of how we get into the regenerative agricultural space. And then I want to go through a couple different stories as some of the clients and our journey working with them. So one of the first things is when I, get engaged with a new client, really, I have clients that come from zero background as far as growing. In fact, it's like, hey, I want to start growing something either personally or I'm going to create a farm. So from a standpoint of very little skill or knowledge to multi-generational farmers that have been farming the land for a long, long, long time, but they believe that there's a different way, a different approach to be able to do the farming that they're doing. And in reality, when I work with the different, skills of those groups, the principles still apply from somebody who's just brand new getting into this to somebody who's been a multi-generational farmer. There's still this approach that I take working with them. And, one of the things I get a lot, a question is, what do I do? How do I make this change into regenerative agriculture? Or there's a particular problem, like they're running into production issues or water, quality problems or access to water. And then sometimes, even in the positive, when they've done something and all of a sudden they start to see changes, they want to know what is happening. There's kind of a knowledge gap, I think, in this regenerative agricultural space of understanding how these systems actually work. And there's a lot of knowledge in the agrochemical space because that's what a lot of the science was driven towards, and how the interaction between the farmers and the marketplace is in this kind of well-established agrochemical space. And when we start talking about regenerative agriculture, it's definitely a little bit different. And, you know, there's also this aspect of, as regenerative agriculture really starts to take effect, there are all these different processes and tools and techniques and terminology and knowledge that's new, and it can be very overwhelming for a lot of our clients. Like, hey, I know I want to go in the space, but boy, I don't understand some of the different approaches or techniques, or why does it actually work. And what our approach to do is to really help our clients make that transformation, but then also to impart knowledge and education, because that's typically one of the pillars that is missing when somebody moves into doing this kind of growing. So, when I work with a client, one of the first things I really, really want to do is to establish a mindset. And this could be a switch or a change from the mindset that they've had in the past. And really, when it really boils down to it, I will work with my clients to say, we got to establish goals. Is it that you're trying to achieve? Why are you making this change? Or why do you want to grow in this way? And the goals should be fairly well defined. This could be, I want to increase production by 10%. I want to use 50% less water. Those are tangible goals that we can actually try to meet. And so we establish those, define those goals. The next thing that we really have to get into is understanding the systems that are in play. And, I've worked with multi-generational farmers that understand the system to the context of how they've been in or working that system. And one of the things I find that's severely lacking in the agrochemical space is understanding the role of microorganisms and the role of ecosystems into their farms. It's a much more mechanical, formulaic kind of approach. And so we define goals, we now understand how do all these systems actually work. And it's very important, not only for the farmer, but everybody who's interacting with that farm. I mean, there's a lot of large farms we go to where it's the farm owner, but then you have a farm manager, you have an irrigation specialist, you have an equipment manager, you have a whole slew or team of people that are operating that farm. And it's really important that everybody understands how the overall system really truly works. And so when we start to transform these properties, that everybody can understand, not only, hey, I'm doing this work, but why is it important that I'm doing this work? And then lastly, we've got to look at what are the tools that we're going to use. Compost is a tool. Compost extracts are a tool. The equipment that you use is a tool. And as any person who's going to go and build something or transform something, you want to make sure that you're utilizing the correct tools. So we'll identify what those tools actually are. And I like to frame the work that we do into buckets that are easy to manage and easy to understand. And really, when we're working into this kind of regenerative agricultural space, Soil is extraordinarily important. And in fact, I mean, I think everybody knows soil, plants grow in soil. But in the agrochemical space, so much about the soil is not understood or not utilized correctly, and it's treated as kind of this dead medium that's there. Well, it's a living element that we really truly need to understand. So we'll spend a lot of time focusing in on the soil itself. The next is management, and management is really, really key to the success of any farm. If you're going to be growing something like almonds, you need to understand the life cycle of the trees, the life cycle of the pests, how and when do you harvest, and when do you prune, and all those management activities that you're going to do to run this operation. But what's really important about the management side of the house is how does that management that you're doing impact the overall system that we're working inside of? If you're going to till the soil, there's going to be an impact. So we want to address all the different management aspects that we're working through. And one of the exercises I go through with my clients is we'll look at and say, let's identify all the different management practices that you do. And I want to put them into one of three categories. Is that management practice beneficial for the soil microbes and the soil health? Is that management practice neutral, like it has really no impact at all? Or is that management practice harmful to the overall ecosystem and the soil health? And once we've identified and kind of placed those management practices, those different buckets, now we can prioritize the work that we want to do. We'll look at all of those management practices that are in that harmful category, and we'll find alternatives, or at least try to find alternatives to them. So we can move that management practice from a harmful to a neutral or a beneficial. And that's a good way to help us prioritize the work that we actually want to do so we can accelerate that transformation to really transition that project or that operation as fast as we can into a sustainable, reliable type of system. And another bucket that tends to get overlooked, especially in the agricultural space, is around ecosystems. When you talk to a lot of farmers, it's a machine, it's a factory, it's a very extractive kind of process. When we start talking about regenerative agriculture, the ecosystem is extraordinarily important. We have to make sure that that farm, that operation fits within a healthy, sustainable ecosystem. So I'm going to spend just a couple slides talking about soil and also talking about ecosystems, because it's really, really important that when you walk away from a talk like this or in your own environment, what do these things truly mean? So when I look at an ecosystem, I like to define things. And there's a definition I have on the left-hand side here that I like to be able to describe an ecosystem. And we're going to kind of break this down. And an ecosystem is a complex network of living organisms and their physical environment. All right, let's stop there. So we've got living and non-living. So in the science world, you're going to hear them as called the biotic components, which are living organisms. And this is going to be the microbes in the soil, so bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, earthworms, to you name it, all through that whole spectrum of living organisms that are going to interact, let's say, in that ecosystem. And the plants, don't forget the plants. The plants are a very important part of what we do, and they're part of this ecosystem. And then we have abiotic components. These are the non-living elements, and this is going to be the sand, the silts, the clays, the rocks, the pebbles, the organic matter. The sunlight is an abiotic component, the water, the wind, the climate, the temperature. These are all things that are going to have an impact into an ecosystem. So again, that's that complex network between biotic and abiotic. The next part of the definition is interacting through nutrient cycles and energy flow. So the interaction, this is really the key thing about an ecosystem. It's the relationship and process between the biotic and abiotic components. How do the living and non-living elements of this ecosystem interact with each other? And that interaction is going to drive things like energy flow. And I'll use this example of energy flow. Sunlight, energy. Plants have this wonderful ability called photosynthesis, the ability to transform that sunlight energy into chemical energy. And so that's an energy flow. The plants are helping us change that from sunlight energy to chemical energy. Well, the plant has all this chemical energy that it will push out of its body into the soil and on the surfaces of the plant in the form of foods, this chemical energy that they can now feed bacteria and fungi. And so this is this flow of energy that's going through the system. And we want to make sure that this is a highly efficient flow of energy. Well, what do bacteria and fungi do with all that new chemical energy that they have? They create enzymes that have the ability to mine nutrients from the soil profile, from the sands, the silts, the clays, the bedrocks, the organic matter. And that allows for this unlocking of nutrients into the soil profile. And we now have organisms that will eat the bacteria and fungi, which will then unlock those nutrients into a soluble form that will go back into the plants. And so it's all these interactions and energy flow that is extraordinarily important for us in an ecosystem. And the last part of this definition is really the ties it all together, which is maintain balance and sustainability. A healthy ecosystem has this balancing between all the biotic and abiotic components that are in that ecosystem. And we want it to be sustainable. And really, there's probably one thing I would also add to this definition, which is resilience. So that when we have climatic issues or events that occur, that these systems have the ability to be resilient against those. Okay, so this is a really important aspect when I'm working with clients, because a lot of, especially in the agricultural world, the thought of an ecosystem is really not present. It may be there in kind of a nascent way, but what we really want to do when we're talking about regenerative agriculture is have a lot of focus in on creating that balanced and sustainable ecosystem. All right. The other thing that I like to talk to my clients about in this kind of early interaction is around the properties of soil, because in the world of soil, most people think of it in really two forms: the physical aspect and the chemical aspect of soil. So let's talk about that. The physical aspect of soil is the structure. So what do we have as far as the level of compaction that it's in that soil? What is the makeup of that soil? Is it sand? Is it silt? Is it clay? Is it a combination of those things? Does it become loamy? So these are all physical aspects, and how much organic matter is actually in that soil. And there becomes a texture to that soil as well. So when farmers are farming, they look to say, hey, look, I want to make sure that my soil has enough pore space and allows roots to grow freely through the soil. And so the texture is really, really important in a growing operation. So a lot of farmers understand that. And a lot of people in agriculture and growing systems really understand the physical aspect of soil. Then we have the chemical aspect of soil, the cations, anions. This is what is solubilized inside of the soil profile. And this is really important for plants, because this is where plants are able to pull their nutrients up into their bodies and perform the work that they actually need to do. And if we just focus on that physical and chemical, you can see where in the kind of conventional farming and agricultural space, I'm going to have devices that are going to change the physical. So tilling is going to open up the structure of the soil. But we know when we till that it only lasts for so long, and then we get rain and other events and it compacts down. So I have to retill again. There's this mechanical aspect I constantly have to do to change the structure of the soil. And then the chemical aspect of it, so farmers will be farming and say, hey, my plant is deficient in whatever nutrient, and I'm going to add a fertilizer. And they also may say, hey, I'm going to use some chemical aspects to change the structure. So if my soil is really compacted, I might add gypsum into the equation to try to change the calcium magnesium balance so that I get better flocculation of my soils. But this is a paradigm that's constantly where you have to apply some kind of management practice to till and add, till and add, till and add, right? And it's a ever-ending loop. And in fact, the more you do that, the more you degrade the soil, the more that you have to interact with that system. What's completely forgotten in the properties of soil is the biological aspect of it. And in fact, the biology is the microbes and all those higher order organisms that are living inside that soil. And the plants themselves are part of the biological aspect of soil. And if our focus is on biology, biology will change the physical and the chemical for us. So the microbes will change the structure and the texture of the soil. They will aggregate the soil so that there's pore space and the ability to allow more oxygen to be absorbed and more water holding capacity in that soil. The biology will change the chemical aspects of the soil. It will do the mining of the nutrients so that we have the appropriate nutrient cycling happening in that soil. And so if our focus is not on the physical and chemical, but on the biological, we can reset the physical and chemical to match what that plant actually needs. And this is a big change for a lot of people that I work with, my clients, to say, let's stop focusing on the physical and chemical. We may focus still on those early in our transition, but we're going to get away from the manipulations that you've been doing in that physical and chemical space, and our focus is going to be on biological. And in fact, I tell a lot of my clients, you are maybe a farmer of carrots, you may be a farmer of Brussels sprouts, you may be a farmer of almonds, but eventually what you're going to become is a microbe farmer. And if your focus becomes on farming the appropriate microbes and creating a habitat that's really beneficial for them, they will take care of the other aspects of your management practices around the physical and the chemical aspects of soil. And really, it's funny, usually within a year or two or years into the engagement, they really truly understand this. I am a microbe farmer. First and foremost, that's what I'm really going to be focusing in on. And that is the benefit that the farmers will get to create this ecosystem that's sustainable and resilient and so forth. Okay, so this is just a little bit of a teaser as far as, the interaction that we work with clients and the type of knowledge that we try to impart with our clients as well. I want to spend the kind of last part of my presentation just talking about different stories, what were some of the experiences that we have and some of the successes. And also we'll talk about some of the challenges that we run into as well. So I have 3 examples I'm going to go through: a homestead, a vineyard, and an orchard. And this homestead is actually was my homestead in Northern California. It was 5 acres, and I was growing corn. And this was a little bit early on into my career. I was trying some different, bed techniques and some hugelkultur trenches and things like that. But I wanted to say, hey, look, I'm going to take a set of land that has really no agriculture has been done on it, and I'm using compost and compost extracts only to be able to drive this system to make that change, that transformation. And corn was the plant that I was growing in this case. So new garden location. This was an area that was partly a little bit of woodland, partly a dirt road, and a storage area. And in reality, the condition of the soil was not that great. For many years, we'd stored tractors and lots of equipment, and we had a road that was going through there. So the soil was highly compacted. When I looked under the microscope, it wasn't microbial very, very good. So it was in kind of a poor shape. And I thought, all right, perfect example for me to be able to transform a degraded landscape, and let's put a production in here. Some corn was going to be the production. And so we didn't have any chemical toxicity issues as far as that I knew from the history from when I had the homestead, and from previous. This was a very natural landscape. Really probably didn't have any chemical contamination, but we had compaction to deal with, and also the soil profile was very, very thin. Here we're talking about 2 to 3 foot of soil before we hit bedrock. So we had some significant challenges that we had to overcome. All right. I think my headset went away. Keisha, Casey, Raleigh,
Oh,
thumbs up.
I can hear you fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. My headset just said power off. I was like, all right. Okay, so here's a little bit about growth. And this is the first year corn. So this is a first year bed. This is the first planting that we put into it. Within 19 days from planting the corn, we had strong early growth. Germination rates were fantastic, high 90% in germination. If we had double seeds in there, we thinned it down to 1 stalk. After 30 days, you can see the vigor. That's this second picture here. Vigor was fantastic. The plants are growing really, really, really strong. After 44 days, they really had taken off. In fact, Adam, who was helping me in this project, he's 6'2", and you could tell that the cord stalks were well above his head. We were at 6 to 9 foot tall. Within 70 days, we started harvest. In fact, this was an 80-day corn, and we were 10 days early in doing our harvest. And then at 105 days, the system was done, the corn was shut down, and now we could use all that residue, all that material can go into making new compost, or we can use it as mulch. And just a couple things, we applied extract very, very little. I mean, we planted, I soaked the seeds in extract. I put a little bit of compost on the top of the beds when we were making it, and we extracted just a few times to be able to make sure that it was inoculated well with the right microbes. And looking at in a microscope, the soil was accepting the microbes very well, the established very quickly, and we were getting that community that we were looking for. And one of the things on the picture on the right, you can see here, the corn was forming tillers, and typically corn will form tillers in two scenarios. One, the main stalk gets damaged, so it's like, hey, last resort, I'm gonna try to put off a secondary shoot here and just see if I can get an ear of corn to grow. The other is when there's a lot of available nutrients, like there's a lot of vigor, the plant will put on tillers, and the tiller will usually could form another ear of corn. And we found almost every single one of the corn stalks had put on tillers. So we knew that we had really good vigor growing in those plants. And my friends that know me very well know I'm bricks obsessed. I walked around my homestead in California with my bricks meter in my pocket all the time. I would bricks everything, and all bricks really is looking is what's the available amount of sugars that are in whatever you look at. It could be a leaf sample, it could be a piece of fruit, it could be something that's going to contain that sugar. And it's a good way to understand how well a plant is functioning. Typically, the higher the bricks, that means the plant is functioning fairly well. And when we pulled our bricks for that corn, we were averaging about 22.67 bricks on the scale of bricks. And when you look at the range of corn, 6 being poor, 24 being excellent, we had reached almost to excellent within 1 year of trying to transform the soil. So I was really, really happy with the results of this trial. It was, again, a way to show that we could take a degraded landscape and very, very quickly make a huge, huge change. Okay, so that was my homestead. Second example here is vineyards. So this particular client, it's an 8-acre vineyard, and this client wanted to make a natural wine. So this was without using any chemical additives or any kind of chemicals into the process, and wanted a very regenerative ecosystem approach to growing their wine. In winemaking, there's this thing called a terroir, which is the flavor of the land is how it really translates. And you get that when you get away from that agrochemical kind of aspect. The wine or the grapes express very differently. You get these different secondary metabolites that start to occur that change the flavor of the grapes themselves. And one other interesting thing about this particular client, had never grown grapes before, was very new in the whole growing, just knew that they wanted to get into the winemaking business, had a huge passion. It was a family project too. The parents were helping kind of fund the original vineyard. The brother and sister were looking at growing and making wine. And so this was a brand new approach for them. And in fact, it was a good scenario for us, and the fact that this client was like, hey, look, I don't have any preconceptions about how to grow vineyards, and I'm all ears. I want to learn how to do this. And we have another consultant that was part of this process that was a vineyard consultant, somebody about growing grapes, and this person specialized in natural winemaking. So I focused in on the soil biology and the ecosystem approach. The other consultant was about, how do you prune, what varieties do you grow, and those kind of things. And with those two, expertises, my client was actually able to transform a very successful vineyard. So let's talk about that. This picture on the right is actually the land. The land is 11 acres in total. 8 acres is under production. And this was a fallow hayfield. It had been hayed for decades. And in fact, when we walked out there, it was middle summertime frame. It was a patch, 11 acres of star thistle. And if those of you that don't know this plant called star thistle, it grows in some of the most degraded landscapes. It's tough. It has all these thistles on them. It's not fun to walk through. It's an indicator that this is a soil that's under a lot of degradation. And in fact, when we went out there and started to assess the soil, I had a tool called a penetrometer, which is we're going to go down and actually measure the compaction and so forth that's in that soil. And it was highly compacted. There was no structure to the soil. And when we did a microbial analysis, it was almost devoid of microbial life. It was in a really, really, really bad space. And this is an area where there's a lot of vineyards. So there is good success around there saying, hey, look, this is a perfect area to grow grapes, but this land was definitely not in shape to make that start. So what do we do? And this is part of that process I talked about, establishing goals. So really, when I was talking with the farmer, we established two major goals that we used throughout the life of this transition, which was we want to produce grapes that are unique and express terroir, that they get that expression from the land, and that we want to farm in a method that's regenerative and creates beneficial ecosystems, so that we have this resilient, sustainable kind of ecosystem that's there. That was the two premises or goals that we really focused in on this project. So the first approach that we had was reduce compaction. And I'm a very much a no-till kind of person. I think tilling is really bad for um, the the overall ecosystem in the soil, especially for fungal networks. It really damages them quite severely. But in this case, it was so compacted, we needed to till one last time. In fact, what we did is we brought in a subsoiler and we ripped the soil down to 3 foot in depth. And then we, broke up all that compaction, and then we had to recondition the field. But we added compost, and we added compost extract. We inoculated with beneficial microbes when we were doing that process of breaking up all that compaction. And then really we started in with regenerative management practices. So we made sure that we planted our plants with compost and compost extract. In fact, the bare root grapes that we got, we soaked them in extract for at least 15 minutes before we planted in each planting hole. And so we wanted to make sure that the plants from the get-go, from the time that they got into the soil, that they had as much access to the microbial community as possible to start to establish those relationships. And they did. They did very, very, very well. The other thing about this kind of regenerative, ecosystem approach is we wanted to have a habitat for all the different natural predators that would help us control pests and insects in the vineyard. And so around the sides of the vineyard, we planted hedgerows, or really food forests. So these are fruit trees with herbaceous plants, and we also put in owl boxes and other things to really help us kind of establish this really healthy ecosystem around the vineyard itself. So where are we at? We're 5 years in, and the plants are very productive. Here's an example of one of the varieties, and they're loaded with grapes. And in fact, one of the things that I would say about the quality of the grapes. So last year was the first year that he really sold grapes, and he has 5 varietals on this particular property. And there's a particular varietal that there's a winemaker that is looking for that variety, and he had bought my client's grapes. And when they were tasting it, and this winemaker buys the same variety from many different vineyards and tends to blend them and make his wine. When himself and his colleagues tasted the grapes that came off of this property, they said, this is different. This is definitely unique, and it is something that we think is very special. And in fact, they decided not to blend it. They made it just a line just with those grapes themselves. And my client is already working on very long-term contracts to be able to sell his grapes now to these winemakers because of the quality that's coming off of this vineyard. So my client is extraordinarily happy. And and one of the things we talked about early on in this is around ecosystems and how this property is going to transform over time. And we're 5 years into it. And one of the things we're looking at, there's this thought process around, it takes about 7 years to really do this kind of transformation to a healthy, established ecosystem. And my client feels like, yeah, if you're 5 years in, and he feels like in about 2 more years, he's probably going to have a pretty resilient, functioning ecosystem with all the effort that he's kind of put into this property. Now we've had setbacks, there's for sure. And in fact, Mother Nature can rear her head. And early on, we got hit with 2 really devastating frosts early in the life cycle of the plant. In fact, one of the varieties, we thought we lost the entire varietal, that we thought that those plants got burned so bad from the frost. But amazingly, the plants recovered. And in fact, I think the mortality was very, very low. Now it set the plants backwards, but they were resilient against that. They had enough energy to be able to recover, and so we didn't have to go into another set of massive planting to recover from that issue. So yeah, this client is very, very thrilled. And I'm really happy too in the fact that this is truly from the ground up. We have just applied compost and compost extracts and compost teas. And this vineyard is just crushing it. It's really, really doing a good job. The last example is talking about almonds. And really, this is a story of conventional agriculture. This particular client has been farming for decades. They have 1,100 acres of almonds and 100 acres of olives, but they also manage a lot of other acreage as far as doing the harvesting and things like that. And this farmer is very conventional in his approach to farming, but he's also very pragmatic. And he was really looking to the future, saying, I see headwinds in front of us, both from a water standpoint in California, where the reduction in water is going to be a huge reality for them, and also regulations around the use of pesticides and fungicides and other products. So how can we change the farming so we can either reduce or eliminate those from the equation? So really preparing for the future. So again, the history of this conventionally managed, there's the trees are always in a different set of growth states. 1,100 acres, there's about a 20-year life cycle with almonds. From the time you plant to at 20 years, the trees tend to be aged out, and then remove those trees and then plant in a new set of trees. These are all irrigated crops, and there's a lot of different pressures, both from, again, water issues to pest problems and so forth. And this was something that the farmer really was experiencing every year. And again, we wanted to try to change that. So we looked at the goals, and for this farmer, the goals were really in how do I reduce my input costs and how do I increase profitability? Especially when you start getting these large scale farms, the profit margins are thin, and you have a bad year or a couple bad years in a row, and that can just destroy a farm. So again, we needed to be able to make sure that we could reduce those costs so that we can still maintain that profitability, even if we're going to have challenging years and so forth. And the other aspect around this was how do we reduce water usage? Again, California has drought issues and it's going to continue to have drought issues. And we want to make sure that we have a soil that can hold on to water longer and use less water. So our approaches here, again, increase organic matter. Boy, we were sub 1% in organic matter in these fields. So how do we increase it? So we were adding compost and shell to the properties to try to add organic matter as best we could. And we want to trial different approaches. This farmer is like, hey, look, I want to find out what is the best way for us moving forward. So we had a lot of different trials that we were working through, which is a really smart way. I always tell my clients, if you're going to be moving or transitioning to some new growing paradigm, we should do trials simply because it enforces to you that it can be successful with what you're trying to do. But then really the most important aspect is how do you learn at a small scale all the different things that you're going to need to do so that then you can push it to a large scale with knowledge and experience and so forth. So trialing was really, really important for us. And my client wanted to be able to utilize as much of their existing equipment as possible. So we went through and said, all right, your spray rig still work well. We tested all those things out. We wanted to make sure that we minimize the amount of capital expenditure to go through this transition. And liquid amendments were really the cornerstone for us. That's how we were going to get the biology out there. And in fact, we go through a process called fertigation, which is we push the extracts through the irrigation system. So that's just the most efficient way to be able to deliver biology, especially in a large scale kind of aspect. So where are we at today? It's 4 years since we started. We've had significant reduction in fertilizer. In fact, 80% reduction in nitrogen fertilizer, 100% reduction in phosphorus, and 50% reduction in potassium. And it's just continuing to go as we continue to establish the microbial community and build in the soil. We're seeing more and more reductions. And almonds in particular are a challenging crop. simply because of the way that the harvesting of almonds is. Right now, you harvest almonds on a bare floor. So, bare floors in nature are not a good thing. And so we had to get very creative about how we put cover crops in and put biology to decompose those cover crops and all that compost and shell that we put out in the field. So by the time we get to harvest, it's again back to a bare floor. And that slows us down in that transition. So where in other crops, we may be able to transition them in 2 years, 3 years. This may be more of a 10-year kind of process to get them to a really healthy kind of soil profile. And there's still work to be done on this particular farm for sure, but the farmer's ecstatic in the fact that we've been able to make this big change. And he grows olives, and the olive crop is amazing because we don't have to worry about bare floors and the management practices that we have with almonds. And in fact, he has a manager that manages the 100 acres of olives for him, and that manager is blown away. Like, I haven't seen trees grow like this before and already producing significant crops. So from the olive standpoint, my farmer's like, this is great. We are just really crushing it. And so much so that they decided to create a liquid amendment facility where we can make up to 8,000 gallons of compost extract a day, not only to service his farm, but also to sell to other farms. We can probably support about 30,000 acres of production in the local area through his liquid amendment facility. So I just want to give you an example of small scale, medium scale, large scale, all the different things that we actually can do. So that was my presentation, and